The body sat up at 2:13 in the morning with the sheet still tucked beneath its arms and the toe tag swinging like a pendulum in the cold blue light. For one impossible second, the morgue sounded louder than an airport runway. The refrigeration units seemed to roar. The fluorescent lights hummed with a sharp insect whine. Water clicked somewhere deep in the pipes. Then everything dropped into a silence so complete that even the young technician standing 3 feet away could hear the wet crackle inside the corpse's throat. Evan Mercer did not scream. He froze with one gloved hand on drawer 7. His breath trapped halfway in his chest, his eyes fixed on the pale thing now sitting upright on the stainless steel tray. The woman's skin had the waxy gray tone of someone who had been dead for more than a day. Her hair hung in damp strands over one eye. Her mouth was slightly open, showing teeth stained dark at the gums. A line of dried blood ran from the corner of her ear into the collar of the hospital gown they had placed on her earlier that evening. Then her head turned, not fast, not with the jerking violence of an involuntary spasm or a reflex that could be explained away later under brighter lights. It turned slowly, deliberately, with the patient, curious motion of someone trying to recognize a face in a crowd, and she looked directly at him. If this is your first night here, welcome back to the channel. Tell me where you are watching from. If true horror stories, morgue stories, and late-night nightmares are your thing, like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Because what happened in that underground room beneath Seattle did not end when the body moved. That was only the first warning. Because when the corpse finally spoke, it did not say his name. It said in a voice like water trapped in a drain, "She is still under the floor." For 3 years, Evan Mercer had worked nights as a morgue technician at Harborview Annex, a county medical facility on the south edge of Seattle, where the city's bright glass towers gave way to older concrete blocks, rain-dark service roads, and buildings that looked as if they had been poured straight out of bad dreams. He was 31, methodical, solitary, and exactly the kind of man who had once believed that the dead were the easiest people in the world to be around. They did not interrupt. They did not lie. They did not ask for anything. The morgue occupied the basement level beneath pathology and records in a section of the building most visitors never saw. The elevator opened into a narrow corridor lined with painted cinder block, the kind of institutional green that somehow made every face look sick. There was always a faint mixture of bleach-cold metal and something older underneath it all, not rot exactly, but the sweet, stale scent of damp paper and sealed spaces. The floor tiles were older than most of the staff. Hairline cracks traveled through them like veins. Evan's work was practical and repetitive. Intake, identification, chain of custody paperwork, cleaning trays, logging personal effects, coordinating with transport teams, pathologists, funeral homes, and the occasional detective who came down half awake and smelling of stale coffee. His shift began at 10 in the evening and usually ended at 6 in the morning, just as Seattle's watery gray dawn was starting to leak across the sky. He liked routine because routine made the building feel smaller. He parked in the same lower lot every night. He drank coffee from the same dented black thermos. He always checked the compressor gauges first, then the receiving bay, then the evidence refrigerator, then the drawers. At midnight, he filled out his first log update. At 1:30, he walked the corridor that led past the old surgical storage room and the disused cremation intake alcove that had been sealed before he was hired. At 3, he made another round whether he needed to or not. Most nights, nothing happened except paperwork and silence. But Harborview Annex was one of those places that carried rumors the way old houses carried mildew. Nobody offered them directly. The stories arrived in fragments, usually from transport workers, security guards, and maintenance men who had spent too many years underground. A drawer opening by itself. A phone ringing in records after the line had been disconnected. A woman in a pale gown seen at the far end of the service corridor, always walking away, never toward anyone. The old floor in Storage B lifting in one corner whenever it rained hard enough. Evan did not believe in ghost stories, but disbelief was not the same thing as comfort. He had his own private collection of details he never mentioned out loud. The temperature in Corridor C was always colder than the thermostat reading. The camera outside the disused alcove flickered for 7 seconds every night at 2:13. And once, while relabeling a shelf in the evidence cooler, he heard what sounded unmistakably like someone breathing directly behind him, slow and moist, and close enough to touch his neck, even though he was alone. He told himself what every practical man tells himself in an old building, pipes, airflow, settling concrete, mechanical noise, stress. Still, there were things about Harborview that refused to settle into reason. The basement had been renovated twice, but some portions of the original structure remained hidden behind newer walls. A maintenance supervisor once told him the building had gone up in stages over the better part of a century, starting as a municipal infirmary, then a charity hospital, then a county pathology center. Records from the earlier decades were incomplete. There had been a flood in the archives. There had been a fire in 1978. There had been storage rooms nobody used anymore because no one quite agreed what had once been stored there. The old workers spoke about the basement as if it had moods. "Some nights it is asleep," said Darlene Cho, a 60-year-old pathology assistant who had been there longer than anyone else. "Some nights it listens." Evan laughed when she said that. Darlene did not. She was a narrow woman with silver hair, square shoulders, and a face that looked carved from dry cedar. She smoked clove cigarettes outside on her break and never wasted words. If she noticed something odd, she noticed it in silence first. One November night, while they were signing off on an intake from King County General, she paused over the paperwork and tapped the date with one yellowed fingernail. "Do not open 7 alone tonight," she said. Evan looked up. "Why?" Darlene shrugged. "Bad date. That is not a reason." "It is enough of one." She left before he could ask more. He opened drawer 7 that night and found nothing unusual inside. Male 64 heart failure standard transfer from ICU. No movement, no missing paperwork. Nothing except a faint smell of wet soil that clung to the drawer for hours afterward. He never told anyone about that smell either. December bled into January. The Seattle winter deepened, wrapping the city in rain-sodium streetlight haze, and the kind of darkness that began in late afternoon and felt personal by midnight. Evan's apartment in Beacon Hill was small and quiet, and his life outside work was narrower than he admitted. He had an ex-wife in Tacoma. He had not spoken to in 8 months, a mother in Spokane who called every Sunday, and no real friends beyond co-workers who disappeared into their own daylight lives as soon as shift ended. So the morgue became his world. Its rhythms sank into him. He could tell which refrigeration unit was cycling by the pitch of its hum. He knew the exact second the backup generator would click after a storm surge. He knew which hallway light lagged half a beat before turning on. He knew the chipped edge on the intake counter, the warped threshold outside the washroom, the way condensation collected on drawer 12 faster than the others. And beneath all of that knowledge, the building slowly taught him another lesson. Some places did not feel haunted because something happened there once. Some places felt haunted because something had never left. The first clear sign came on a wet Thursday in late February when a body arrived from an apartment fire in Pioneer Square. Female, unidentified at intake, approximate age late 20s, severe smoke exposure, minimal external burns, found alone. Nothing about the file seemed extraordinary, except for one handwritten note clipped to the front from the responding officer. Witness claimed victim was knocking from inside wall before fire crews arrived. Evan read that line twice under the intake lamp while rain tapped the loading dock door behind him. Then he looked down at the black body bag on the gurney. For no reason he could explain, every hair on his arms lifted beneath his scrub sleeves. That should have been enough warning. It was not. The woman from the Pioneer Square fire arrived just after 11:30, along with a soaked transport team and a stack of incomplete paperwork. Seattle rain had followed them in needling across the loading dock in silver diagonal lines. One of the transport men cursed at the wheels of the gurney. The other refused to meet Evan's eyes. "Apartment collapse case," Evan asked, signing the transfer line. The older transport worker nodded. "Fire in a brick building off Yesler. 3rd floor mostly gone. Any identification yet? No wallet, no phone. Nothing on her but this." He placed a clear evidence pouch on the counter. Inside it was a ring tarnished almost black, set with a cloudy stone that looked more like an eye than a gem, found clenched in her left hand. Evan looked from the ring to the body bag. "Family notified." The transport worker gave a short laugh that contained no humor. "No family to notify if nobody knows who she is." Then, after a pause that stretched too long, he added, "One woman outside the building kept screaming that they were too late. Said the girl was still trapped under the floorboards even while they were bringing the body out." The witness from the note, "Probably. Medics said she was in shock." The younger worker muttered. She kept saying there were 2 voices. Neither man elaborated. After they left, Evan wheeled the gurney into receiving and zipped the bag open under the overhead examination light. The woman inside looked younger than the report suggested, mid-20s perhaps. Her hair was dark and singed at the ends, her face smudged with soot. The smoke damage had left her lips split and dry, but the strangest thing was how little actual fire had marked her. For someone pulled from a burning apartment, she looked almost preserved, as if the flames had touched the room around her but hesitated at her skin. There were bruises around both wrists, not severe, not fresh enough to be obvious at first glance, but visible once the body was cleaned. Evan documented them, bagged the ring, logged the time, and prepared her for temporary storage pending autopsy in the morning. He should have felt the same detached focus he brought to every intake. Instead, he felt watched. The sensation began as a pressure between the shoulder blades, subtle but immediate. He turned once toward the door. Nothing. Turned again toward the mirrored cabinet. Only his own reflection, pale and narrow behind a surgical mask, eyes too tired and too alert. He told himself it was the witness statement. People said strange things at fires. Smoke, shock, adrenaline. None of that had anything to do with the woman on the table. Still, when he reached for her left hand to confirm the effects inventory, he hesitated. The fingers were stiff but not fully locked. Soot had gathered in the creases of her palm. There were crescent-shaped impressions in the skin where the ring had been clenched tightly enough to mark her. He leaned closer to inspect the hand under the lamp and noticed a faint, dark residue along the base of the thumb. Something between dried blood and ash. Number, not ash. Dirt, packed beneath the nails and ground into the lifeless skin as if she had been clawing at soil. That unsettled him enough that he took a second photograph and added a note to the chart. At 12:10, he transferred her to cold storage. Drawer 7 was the next available slot. The tray glided in with the familiar steel hiss. He closed the drawer, updated the log, and went back to paperwork, but concentration would not hold. Twice he found himself staring toward the drawer wall without realizing he had stopped writing. Once, he thought he heard a soft tapping from the refrigeration row, irregular and patient, like nails against metal. When he walked over to check, the sound stopped. At 1:58, Darlene called from pathology upstairs, asking whether the fire victim had arrived. "She is here," Evan said. A brief silence. "What drawer?" 7. Another silence, longer this time. Darlene exhaled through her nose. "Do not open it again tonight, unless you absolutely have to." Evan leaned back in his chair. "Can you please explain why everyone keeps saying things like that?" "It is the date. That still does not mean anything. You have not seen the old case files." "What old case files?" The line crackled. Darlene lowered her voice. "Before the renovations, there was an isolation ward down there. Before that, a charity infirmary. Women used to disappear through those systems. Unclaimed patients, indigents, addicts, immigrants with no family nearby. Paperwork went missing. Bodies were buried under numbers instead of names. Some were not buried at all." Evan frowned. "You cannot just say that and hang up." "I am not saying anything official," she replied. "I am telling you that if 7 makes noise tonight, let it make noise." The call ended. He stared at the receiver for several seconds, more annoyed now than frightened. He disliked insinuation. He disliked superstition dressed up as folklore. And yet annoyance did not stop him from checking the lock on receiving or from looking twice at the hall camera feed where Corridor C appeared as it always did, empty, washed in fluorescent light with the sealed storage alcove at the far end like a closed mouth. 213 arrived while he was relabeling specimen bins. The exact moment announced itself with a chirp from the wall clock and a hard flicker from the overhead lights. Not a full power loss. Just one stuttering dip long enough for shadows to shift strangely across steel surfaces and then snap back. At the same instant, the monitor showing the corridor cameras fuzzed with static. A sound followed, not from the hall, from inside the refrigeration wall. One sharp knock, then 2. Then a dragging scrape from within drawer 7 as if something inside were moving its weight against metal. Evan set down the label gun. Every rational thought in him assembled immediately. Thermal contraction. Mechanical fault. Tray not fully seated. The body settling after freezing. A rodent in the wall. A faulty slide rail. He recited explanations so quickly they almost sounded like prayer. Then came another sound, a wet inhale. He stood motionless, staring at the drawers. The inhale became a whisper of friction. Cloth against steel. skin against a tray. Against every instinct, he walked toward drawer 7. "Hello," he said, and hated himself the moment the word left his mouth. The morgue did not answer. He reached the handle. The metal felt colder than it should have, so cold it almost burned through his glove. For a second, he remembered Darlene's warning and nearly stepped back. Then the drawer shuddered from the inside. Not hard, just enough to make the handle tremble in his hand. Evan pulled. The tray slid out 6 inches. Dark hair, a pale forehead, one eye open. He jerked the drawer the rest of the way in a panicked reflex, and the tray came out with a metallic rush that sent frost ghosting into the air. The woman who had arrived from the fire lay exactly where he had placed her, except now her eyes were open and fixed directly on him. That alone would have been enough to drop his pulse into chaos. Then she sat up, her spine bent with a slow, terrible stiffness, skin stretching faintly at the throat. Her head tipped forward first, then lifted. The sheet slid to her lap. Her mouth opened a fraction and a thin strand of dark fluid rolled from one corner. Evan stumbled backward into the adjacent tray. The body turned toward him with a sound like frozen rope being twisted. He should have run then. Any sane person would have. But people confronted with impossible things often fail in ordinary ways. He stayed because his mind was still trying to classify what his eyes saw. Cadaveric spasm, nerve discharge, delayed muscular contraction, and air release from the lungs combined with, the body spoke. She is still under the floor. The voice was faint, cracked, and wrong. Not loud, not theatrical. Worse than that. It sounded like speech being forced through tissue that had forgotten how to form it. Evan could not answer. The woman blinked once slowly as if adjusting to the light. Then she raised one soot-stained finger and pointed past him toward the rear corridor leading to the sealed storage alcove. Everything in his body turned to ice. He looked over his shoulder. The corridor behind him was empty. When he turned back, the corpse had collapsed flat against the tray again. Eyes closed, limbs motionless, mouth shut. It looked dead, utterly convincingly dead. He remained where he was for perhaps 10 seconds or perhaps a full minute. Time in shock becomes slippery. Then training reasserted itself just enough for him to lunge for the wall phone and call security. By the time a guard named Luis Ortega came downstairs with irritation written all over his face, the drawer was closed. The body showed no signs of movement, and Evan's own explanation sounded absurd even to him. "A body sat up," Luis repeated. "Yes." "And talked." "Yes." Luis folded his arms. "You need me to write that." Evan stared at him. "I need you to check the corridor cameras." That part at least yielded something. The static at 2:13 had been recorded. 7 seconds of distortion on camera C. Nothing visible in the hall itself. But on the camera aimed at the rear service corridor, just before the screen fuzzed, a shape appeared near the sealed alcove. Not a full figure, not even enough to identify. Just the unmistakable edge of something pale and human standing where no one should have been standing, half hidden by the concrete corner as if it had been watching the morgue door. Luis viewed it twice, then said the image artifact meant nothing. He left 10 minutes later after advising Evan to get some air. Evan did not get air. Instead, he did something worse. He went to records. The basement records room was a forgotten chamber behind pathology supplies lined floor to ceiling with shelves of boxed files and microfilm drawers. The fluorescent tube inside buzzed so loudly it sounded alive. Dust coated everything. The space smelled like mold paper and old rain. He used his badge to access archived county death records and began searching the building history Darlene had hinted at. The results came slowly buried under decades of transfers and departmental renaming. But by 3:25, he had found enough to make his skin crawl. In 1989, before the major basement renovation, there had been an internal investigation into misfiled remains connected to the old county infirmary. Several female decedents had been documented as transferred for burial, but no receiving cemeteries matched the records. One memorandum mentioned possible structural concealment during demolition planning. Another referred to subfloor anomalies in lower storage. A third had been redacted almost completely, except for one surviving line. Recommendation: seal former storage chamber pending legal review. No records showed that any review had ever been completed. Then he found a photograph attached to a maintenance report from the same year. The image showed the basement corridor before renovation. The sealed alcove still open. The floor partly broken up. 2 workers standing near an exposed cavity in the concrete, and from that cavity protruded what looked horrifyingly like a human hand. Evan nearly dropped the file. At 4 in the morning, he went back to the morgue and stood alone in the corridor between the refrigeration wall and the rear hall, listening to the building breathe. He did not open drawer 7 again, but just before shift change, as the first weak gray of morning approached beyond the upper windows, he could not see. He noticed something on the tile outside the sealed storage alcove. A line of wet footprints, bare, small. They began at the concrete wall itself and ended 3 yards later, stopping at the threshold of the morgue door, as if something had come out of the wall during the night and stood there looking in. By daylight, the footprints were gone. Evan knew how insane that sounded even inside his own head. He had seen them clearly at 4:47, 5 left prints, 4 right, each narrow and bare, each dark with moisture against the pale institutional tile. The toes had been too defined to mistake for leaks or drips. They led from the sealed alcove to the morgue entrance, and then simply ended as though whatever had made them had stopped existing at the door. When Darlene arrived at 6:15 with coffee and the expression of a woman already tired of the world, he walked her straight to the corridor. Nothing. Dry floor. Faint scuff marks from transport carts. No footprints. No moisture. Darlene listened to his story without interrupting, then looked past him to the wall. She spoke, she asked. Evan nodded and pointed toward the alcove. Yes. Darlene shut her eyes briefly. When she opened them, some private calculation had settled across her face. You need to go home, she said. That is your advice. My advice is to leave this building before it decides you are part of it. He almost laughed. Instead, he said, there are records showing bodies may have been hidden under the floor back there. I know. He stared. You know, I know enough. Darlene set her coffee on the counter. In 1989, when they started tearing up the old storage section, they found remains. Not one body. More than one. The county shut it down quietly. A legal mess. Public relations. Missing files. Somebody higher up decided it was easier to seal the chamber than answer questions nobody wanted asked. How many bodies? I was not told. Then who was? Darlene's gaze moved to drawer 7. The people who are dead now. That answer infuriated him, not because it was cryptic, but because her tone made it clear she believed what he had seen. Belief should have comforted him. Instead, it made the whole basement feel more hostile. He did go home, but he did not sleep. His apartment windows rattled softly in the wind. Rain stippled the glass. He showered twice, once out of habit, and once because he could not shake the morgue smell from his skin. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the woman sitting up on the tray, head turning with that dreadful patient curiosity finger pointing into the corridor. She is still under the floor. Not they. She. One specific person, one unfinished fact. By early afternoon, he was at his laptop cross-referencing old Seattle newspaper archives, death notices, and public records tied to Harborview Annex's earlier names. Most of it led nowhere. Decades-old bureaucracy made for terrible ghosts. Names vanished into misspellings, institutional transfers, missing paperwork, and the simple cruelty of poverty. Women with no next of kin became case numbers. Case numbers became boxes. Boxes became dust. But one article from March 1989 snagged his attention. Volunteer worker missing after basement flood cleanup. The article was brief. A 26-year-old temporary records assistant named Mara Vale had been reported missing after finishing a late shift during post-flood recovery in the lower levels of the county annex. Officials suspected she had left the premises voluntarily. Her car, however, had remained in the employee lot for 3 days. No follow-up article existed. He searched further and found a grainy employee photo attached to a county newsletter. Young woman, dark hair, long face, slight smile. The fire victim in drawer 7 had dark hair too, but smoke and damage distorted features enough that certainty was impossible. He zoomed in anyway, comparing the line of the jaw, the spacing of the eyes, the shape of the mouth. It could have been her daughter, or it could have been her. He shut the laptop. That evening, Seattle seemed grayer than usual, the sky hanging low over the city like damp wool. He considered calling in sick. He even picked up the phone to do it. But a stronger impulse overrode fear. If something in that basement wanted a message delivered, leaving would not protect him. It would only leave the message there, unfinished. He reported for shift at 10. Luis was at the security desk upstairs and looked uncomfortable the moment he saw him. "You all right?" the guard asked. "Number." Luis rubbed at his jaw. "I did not want to say this with the others around, but I checked the camera feeds again after I got off this morning. And there was more static on the rear hall camera at 2:13 the last 6 nights. I went back that far." He lowered his voice. "Every night. Same 7-second distortion." Evan waited. Luis hesitated. "On 3 of those nights, there is something standing in the frame before the signal breaks. Something. A person. Maybe." He swallowed. "Looks like a woman." That was enough to make the elevator ride down feel like descent in the literal sense, not just the architectural one. The basement seemed colder than normal. The overhead lights carried a faint greenish cast tonight, and the corridor outside the morgue smelled strongly of wet concrete, as if rainwater had seeped through the walls. The fire victim remained in drawer 7, pending final identification. The autopsy had been delayed because the lead pathologist was out sick. Evan checked the tag twice. Jane Doe pending. He also noticed something new. The evidence pouch holding the ring lay on the intake counter where he had left it, except the plastic now showed a crescent smear on the inside, as if damp soil had been pressed against it. He lifted the pouch and turned it toward the light. Dirt had gathered beneath the ring, though the bag remained sealed. He should have logged the anomaly and moved on. Instead, he held the pouch longer than necessary, staring at the stone set into the tarnished band. It was not really a stone at all, or not one he recognized. Milky gray with darker striations running inward from the edges. Under the fluorescent light, it gave the nauseating impression of depth, like something cloudy suspended inside liquid. At 11:30, while he was entering transport times, the morgue phone rang. The extension displayed internal, but when he answered, there was only static. Then, beneath the hiss, breathing. Not mechanical, human, slow, damp, intimate. "Hello," he said. The breathing continued for 3 more seconds. Then a woman's voice, distant and almost lost in the crackle, whispered, "Do not let her go back under." The line died. His hand remained locked around the receiver long after the dial tone returned. At 12:10, he took the call log upstairs to ask whether pathology had tried to reach him. No one had. The extension on record did not match any active desk in the building. Darlene was in the break room eating crackers and reading lab reports. When he told her about the call, she set the papers down carefully, as though sudden movements had become dangerous. "What do you know about Mara Vale?" he asked. A flicker crossed her face. Recognition. "You found the article?" "Yes." Darlene looked toward the doorway before answering. She worked records during the flood cleanup in '89. Temporary hire. Quiet girl. Smart. She kept asking questions after workers found something beneath the old storage floor. That made her unpopular. "What did they find?" "I was not there when they opened it. I only heard what traveled through the building after. Bones first, then more. Wrapped pieces. Women no one had properly logged, some from decades back." Evan felt his throat tighten. Wrapped pieces, old sheets, tar paper, plastic, whatever was available. Jesus. She told one of the clerks she had found names that did not match burial lists. Said there was a pattern. Darlene's voice thinned. 2 nights later, she disappeared. "Do you think she was killed?" Darlene gave him a look that was almost pity. "In places like this, men do not always need to kill you themselves. They only need to bury the paper trail and wait." He went back downstairs, feeling less like a technician and more like someone walking willingly into a trap. The night held for a while after that. Quiet paperwork. Compressor hum. Rain ticking at the dock door. The familiar routine almost convinced him that fear had finally outrun reality. At 1:50, he even laughed softly at himself while rinsing metal instruments in the washroom. Then the lights dimmed. Not a flicker this time. A steady drain, as if the entire basement had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. The bulbs remained on, but weakly casting long green shadows and leaving the corners of the room drowned in diluted darkness. The thermometer on the wall dropped 4 degrees in under a minute, and from beyond the rear corridor came the sound of someone dragging bare feet slowly across wet concrete. Evan shut off the faucet. He listened. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. Not approaching the morgue. Circling just beyond the doorway inside the hall where the sealed alcove sat. Every sensible instinct told him not to look. He looked anyway. The corridor stood empty under the dimmed lights. At first, Then a figure crossed the far end, moving from left to right so quickly and so silently that his mind rejected it. Pale hospital gown. Wet dark hair clinging to the shoulders, bare legs. Gone behind the concrete corner near the alcove before he fully processed what he had seen. Luis, he called, though he knew security was upstairs. No answer. He stepped into the hall. The air there felt denser, colder, as though the corridor were underwater. The smell hit him immediately, wet plaster mold. And beneath that, the sweet mineral odor of freshly turned earth. He followed it toward the alcove. The walls sealing the old chamber had been painted over so many times the surface looked swollen. Hairline cracks branched through the concrete patch. At floor level, where wall met tile, a thin black line showed moisture seeping from underneath. He crouched. The moisture was not water, mud. Dark and glossy, pushing up from the seam in slow beads. His pulse slammed so hard he nearly lost balance. He stood and backed away one step. The wall knocked from the inside, once, then again, not loud. The careful sound of knuckles against a door. Evan stumbled backward into a linen cart. Cloth spilled across the floor behind him. The wall knocked a third time, and this time something answered from inside the morgue. A body drawer sliding open. He turned. Drawer 7 stood 6 inches ajar. He did not remember leaving it that way. Every drawer around it remained flush and sealed. Only 7 protruded a black line of cold between steel and frame. The wall behind him gave a soft, dragging sigh, like someone shifting position on the other side. He moved toward the drawer because terror often narrows choice until only the worst action seems possible. Each step felt distant, dreamlike. The morgue lights pulsed weakly overhead. The monitor showing corridor cameras had dissolved into static. Somewhere in the building, an alarm chirped once and stopped. He reached 7. From within the gap came a whisper. Not from the hall, not from memory. From the drawer itself. "Find me." He yanked it open. The tray was empty. For a second, his brain simply refused the image. There should have been a body. Tag sheet limbs hair. Instead, there was only the rumpled hospital gown and a wide smear of dark mud across the steel. Behind him, from the corridor, came the unmistakable sound of someone wetly climbing to their feet. Evan spun around. At the far end of the hall, near the sealed alcove, stood the woman from the fire, or something wearing her shape. Her skin was pale gray, stretched slick and tight across cheekbones that now seemed too sharp. Her hair hung in wet ropes over her face. The hospital gown clung to her body as if soaked through. Mud streaked her bare legs up to the knees. Her left hand hung open at her side. Her right pointed directly at the floor in front of the sealed wall. She did not blink. He could not move. Her mouth opened. When she spoke, the voice that came out was no longer the broken drain whisper from the drawer. It was fuller now, layered strangely, as if 2 women were speaking through the same ruined throat. "She is awake." The overhead lights went out. Darkness swallowed the corridor so completely that Evan heard his own breath before he felt it. Instinct shoved him backward into the morgue, hands flying for the emergency switch near the door. It clicked uselessly once, twice, 3 times. Then the red backup lights came on. Everything changed under red. Steel gleamed like blood. The floor looked black. Every shadow became deeper and more final. The far hall beyond the doorway glowed dimly, and in that thin emergency light, he saw that the woman was gone from where she had stood. But the mud footprints were back, fresh, wet, bare. One set leading toward the morgue door, another smaller set emerging from beneath the sealed alcove wall and intersecting the first. 2 people, 2 voices. His scalp prickled with cold. Somewhere very close in the darkness, just outside the red wash of the doorway, a woman began to cry, softly at first. The exhausted, hopeless crying of someone who had no strength left to call for help. Evan's mouth went dry. "Who is there?" The crying stopped. Then a different voice answered from the hall lower and trembling. "Do not let her open it." The words were followed by a thud from the sealed wall, hard enough to rattle the linen cart in the corridor. Then another rapid, now violent, as if something on the other side had begun hurling itself against the concrete patch. Cracks spread visibly through the painted seal. Dust spilled from the top seam, and over the pounding cutting through the red dark like a blade came the sound of fingernails scratching from inside the floor. Not the wall, the floor beneath his feet. He looked down. The old tile in front of the morgue entrance had begun to bulge upward no more than half an inch, then an inch as pressure from below slowly lifted it. Something was under the hallway, something alive enough to move, and something else standing somewhere unseen in the corridor was trying to let it out. The tile split with a sound like a bone breaking under weight. Evan staggered backward as the cracked square of flooring lifted higher, tilting at an angle that made the grout lines snap apart one by one. Dust and fine gray powder spilled upward from the seam. The smell that followed was immediate and suffocating wet soil rot, something mineral and old like a place that had never been meant to breathe. The pounding from the sealed wall grew frantic. The crying returned, and then a hand pushed through the floor. Not erupting, not bursting upward with violent force. It emerged slowly, as if the concrete and tile were not obstacles at all, but only layers of water. Pale fingers slid up through the fractured surface, bending unnaturally as they passed through solid material. Nails scraped against the broken tile, leaving thin black streaks behind. Evan could not make himself move. The hand groped once blindly. Then another hand followed, smaller, thinner. The fingers trembled, grasping at nothing, as if trying to find purchase in a world that would not hold them. "She is still under the floor," the first voice whispered again, no longer from the drawer, no longer from memory, but from somewhere all around him, echoing through the walls, through the vents, through the hollow spaces inside the building. The second voice answered, raw with fear. "Do not let her take me back." The tile collapsed inward. The floor gave way in a jagged oval, revealing darkness beneath, not an empty cavity, but a dense, shifting blackness that seemed to absorb the red emergency light rather than reflect it. For a fraction of a second, Evan saw shapes in that darkness. Layers, bodies, not whole, arms, cloth, hair, something wrapped, something bound, and between them something moving. A face rose first, not the woman from the fire, not fully. The features were wrong, stretched thin skin drawn tight across bone, as if it had been pressed under weight for too long. Mud coated the cheeks and filled the mouth. The eyes opened slowly, and they were not clouded with death. They were aware, terrified. "Mara," Evan whispered before he realized he had said it. The face flinched. The hands pushed harder against the edges of the broken floor. The upper body followed, sliding upward in impossible defiance of gravity. The torso dragged free of the dark mass beneath, wrapped in strips of decayed fabric that clung like a second skin. Then something pulled her back. Not a visible force, not a hand. The movement was wrong. Sudden, sharp, as if the darkness itself had tightened around her legs and yanked. Her fingers clawed at the tile. Evan lunged forward. He did not think. He did not weigh consequences. He grabbed her wrist. It felt cold, but not like a corpse. Like something that had been buried in cold ground for too long and remembered what warmth was supposed to feel like. She screamed. Not loud, not full. A broken sound forced through a throat that had forgotten how to hold air. Behind him, something else screamed. The other voice. The one from the body. The one that had sat up. It came from the corridor. Evan turned his head just enough to see her. The fire victim stood at the edge of the morgue doorway, her body now impossibly still. Her head tilted at an angle that no living neck would hold. Mud streamed down her legs in thin rivulets, pooling at her feet. Her mouth opened wider than it should have. The voice that came out was no longer layered. It was singular, cold, possessive. "She belongs here." The pull on Mara's body intensified. Evan felt it through her wrist, a steady dragging force from below, relentless and patient. The darkness beneath the floor shifted, tightening, forming shapes that pressed upward around her legs. Hands, dozens of them, not all intact. Some skeletal, some wrapped in cloth. All reaching, all holding, all pulling. "Help me," Mara gasped. Evan braced his foot against the edge of the broken tile and pulled harder. Pain shot up his arm. His grip slipped once, then tightened again. The mud coating her skin made it difficult to hold on, but he locked his fingers around her wrist and leaned back with everything he had. The woman in the doorway stepped forward. Each movement left a wet print behind. Her head snapped slightly, as if adjusting to a new angle of observation. "You cannot take what was buried," she said. The words did not echo. They sank. The lights flickered violently. The pounding from the sealed wall reached a peak and then stopped. Silence dropped like a weight. For one suspended second, everything held. Then the wall cracked. A fracture shot down the center of the concrete patch, splitting the painted surface with a sharp final sound. Dust exploded outward. A chunk of plaster fell away, revealing darkness behind it. Not a room, not a storage space, but something deeper, hollow, and wrong. A second hand emerged from the wall. Not from below, from within. Fingers pressed outward through the crack, stretching the opening wider. Mara screamed. The pull from below and the pull from behind synchronized. Evan felt her body jerk violently between the two forces as if she were being claimed from both directions. Do not let her go back, under the earlier voice whispered again, closer, now urgent, almost pleading. Evan looked down at Mara, then up at the thing wearing the fire victim's face, then back at the darkness beneath the floor. There was no time to think, only to choose. With a hoarse shout, he yanked. Everything in his body locked and pulled in one desperate motion. Mara's upper body tore free, not cleanly, not gently. The sound that accompanied it was wet and wrong, as if something deeper had been ripped apart. The hands beneath her grasped wildly, scraping against her legs, against the tile, against Evan's arms. But for a single second, their grip loosened. That was enough. He fell backward onto the morgue floor, with Mara collapsing on top of him, both of them coated in mud and dust and something darker. The hole in the floor shuddered. The hands withdrew, not quickly, reluctantly, as if whatever lay beneath had simply decided to wait. The crack in the wall snapped shut with a sound like teeth biting down. The red light steadied, and the woman in the doorway was gone. The silence afterward did not feel like relief. It felt like the pause after something had taken a breath. Evan lay on the cold tile, his chest heaving, his hands still locked around Mara's wrist long after the pulling had stopped. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then she coughed, a weak, broken sound. Mud spilled from her mouth as she turned her head to the side. Her body shook with shallow, uneven breaths. She was alive, not fully, not normally, but alive enough to suffer. Evan pushed himself upright, dragging her with him. The hole in the floor remained jagged and open, but no hands emerged. No movement came from below. Only that same dense darkness, silent now, watching. "We need to get out," he said, though his voice barely worked. Mara's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they did not focus on him. They moved past him toward the corridor. "No," she whispered. Her hand tightened weakly on his sleeve. "If you leave, it follows." The words struck deeper than anything else that had happened. Evan turned his head slowly toward the doorway. The corridor was empty. The sealed wall looked intact again, though hairline cracks now spread across its surface like veins. The moisture at the base had thickened into dark streaks. The footprints were gone, but the smell remained. That wet earthen scent that did not belong in a hospital. "Then what do we do?" he asked. Mara swallowed. Her voice came out thin and trembling, but clearer now. "It needs a place." Evan frowned. "What needs?" She shook her head sharply, a sudden flicker of panic crossing her face. "The one that moved," she said. "The one you saw. It is not what is under there." His stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Mara's eyes locked onto his. It was never buried. The words settled into the room like something heavy. Evan looked instinctively toward drawer 7. The drawer still stood open, empty. The sheet inside was stained with mud, and something else, a faint impression pressed into the fabric. The outline of a body, as if something had lain there briefly, and then gotten up. Mara followed his gaze, her expression twisted. "It found you," she whispered. Evan's pulse began to rise again, not with immediate terror, but with something worse. Understanding. The phone on the wall rang. Both of them flinched. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Evan forced himself to stand and walked toward it, every step feeling heavier than the last. He picked up the receiver with a hand that did not feel entirely under his control. "Hello." Silence. Then the same breathing. Closer now. Wet. Patient. The voice that followed was soft. Familiar. "I am not under the floor anymore." Evan dropped the phone. It swung against the wall, the receiver banging lightly with each movement. Mara made a small broken sound. "We did not save her," she said. The words hit harder than anything else. "We let it out." Morning came too quickly. Or not quickly enough. By the time the day staff arrived, the basement had returned to its usual sterile quiet. The hole in the floor was gone. The tile lay flat unbroken, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. The sealed wall showed only faint hairline cracks that could be explained away by age. There was no mud, no footprints, no sign of damage, and no second body. Mara Vale was gone. Evan searched every corridor, every room, every storage space. He checked intake logs, called upstairs, even went out to the loading dock in the cold, gray morning air. Nothing. It was as if she had never been there. The only evidence left behind was the open drawer 7 and the stained sheet inside it. Darlene found him there just after 7. He told her everything. This time, she did not interrupt. When he finished, she looked at the drawer for a long time. Then she said very quietly, "You should not come back tonight." Evan almost laughed. "You think leaving fixes this?" "No," she said, "but staying might finish it." He did not leave. He could not. Something had shifted inside him during the night, something that would not let him walk away without understanding what had happened, or what had been released. That evening he returned. The building felt different. Not colder, not darker. Closer, as if the walls had moved inward by a fraction of an inch. Luis was not on duty. No one mentioned the events of the previous night. The logs showed nothing unusual. At 10:30, while reviewing intake forms, Evan noticed something new. A file had been added to the system. No timestamp, no author, no record of entry. He opened it. Name, Mara Vale. Status, recovered location, pending transfer. Attached was a single photograph. Black and white, grainy, taken in the basement corridor. It showed the sealed alcove wall, and in front of it, a woman standing with her back to the camera. Long dark hair, hospital gown, bare feet, head tilted slightly as if listening. Evan stared at the image. Then slowly, very slowly, he zoomed in. The woman's head was not tilted forward. It was tilted too far, at an angle no living neck could hold. Behind her, barely visible in the shadow of the wall, something else stood. Not fully formed, not clear, but close. Watching, the overhead lights flickered. The monitor beside him blinked once, then switched to the corridor camera feed. It was live, empty, for a moment. Then, at the far end of the hall, just before the sealed alcove, a figure stepped into frame. Barefoot, still, facing directly toward the camera. Toward him, the head tilted, the mouth opened. And even through the silent screen, Evan knew exactly what it was saying. "You opened it." The screen went black. The lights above him dimmed. And somewhere very close, just beyond the edge of his vision, something wet and patient took a step forward.